Social health. That's an underappreciated topic.
It is very underappreciated. Yes. Typically, we talk about health as physical or mental. And in fact, the World Health Organization defines health as physical, mental, and social well-being. But in society, we kind of have lost track of that third dimension. And it's one of the most important. Social health is as important as physical and mental health.
Interesting. So how would you define social health?
So I define it as the dimension of our overall health and well-being that comes from connection. So if you just think about physical health as being about your body and mental health as being about your mind, social health is about your relationships, your sense of community. And in fact, we see in the research that you can't be wholly healthy if you take care of your body and your mind, but not your relationships. They're vital to your lifespan and also your health span.
Wow. So interesting. And what types of relationships specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's tiered, right? So we have our close relationships with family and friends and the people who we're most kind of emotionally intimate with, who we trust and who we feel supported by. Those relationships are really important, but it's also the broader network around us, whether that's coworkers and the interactions you have on a day-to-day basis with the people you work with, whether that's your neighbors or other people you see on a regular basis. Also the groups that you're part of, right? So social health comes from our one-on-one relationships with people, but also feeling a sense of community, right? Being part of groups that are meaningful to us in different ways. And we see in the data that, all of those confer different benefits, right? It's really important that we have those intimate relationships where we feel seen and heard and understood, and they're caring and long-lasting. But it's also important to have a friendly chat with the barista when you buy your coffee, or wave to a neighbor. Things like that, those little micro moments of connection, also help to make us feel connected and part of our communities.
Like these micro interactions, when you're going to get your coffee or checking in at the gym.
Yeah, they matter. They really matter. They've done studies where, for example, they'll have people go in and buy a coffee in their local coffee shop, and they'll either have them just buy their coffee and leave and just do a normal interaction, or they'll ask some people to go in and actually ask the barista, how are you doing today? Just make it a little bit more positive. Not a lot, right? It doesn't take that much longer, but smile, pay attention, be present in that interaction. And they report feeling happier. Like that small interaction is enough to boost their mood throughout that day. And then longer term in the research, we see that when we feel connected, when we have meaningful interactions regularly, that actually has a whole host of health outcomes beyond just making us feel happy.
Wow. I'm starting to see more and more self-checkout opportunities pop up at the stores that I frequent. You think that's having a mental health, taking a mental health toll?
It's a good question. I don't know if it's enough to really have a detriment, but I will say that in the Netherlands, they've created chat checkouts specifically for conversation. So they've done the opposite, where instead of a self-checkout, you can opt into a certain line where it's going to take longer to get your groceries, but you're going to have a conversation with the person checking you out and other people in line, and it's designed specifically for connection. So you can opt into the long line at the grocery store in the Netherlands.
Yeah, I will generally do that because I like those little interactions.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
As
They're
mundane
fun.
as they may seem. But yeah, they definitely add something to my day.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it's like noon and I haven't spoken to somebody yet at that point, I feel off. I feel a little bit off.
Yeah, but that's most of us, right? When we work remotely, especially people, it's so easy to go hours in your day or days at a time without talking to another person. And we saw that a lot during COVID, of course. So yeah, it's so important for us to be intentional about connection, right? In the same way that we try and get 8 hours of sleep each night, or you pay attention to the foods that you put into your body to be healthy, or you exercise a certain number of times a week, things like that. Just like we're intentional about those kinds of health behaviors, we need to be intentional about connecting each day and about reaching out to friends and spending quality time with our loved ones, because it's as important for our health as any of those other factors.
So true. How did you come to realize the importance of social health in your research and in your career?
Yeah. Well, I have always been fascinated by human connection. Like I remember being a little kid on the playground watching the social dynamics of friends and trying to figure it out. I am more of an introvert than an extrovert. So I remember having to navigate and try and figure out, what does it mean for me to be socially healthy, right? How do you balance solitude with socializing in a way that feels nourishing? And I moved around a lot growing up and over the years. And so every time I moved, I would have to start from scratch, make new friends, build new relationships in the place where I was, as well as stay in touch with loved ones who live far away. So I was constantly paying attention to this theme. And then my first introduction to the research was I was actually doing research at the University of Pennsylvania in the Positive Psychology Center. And positive psychology was this movement to say, okay, we understand a lot about mental illness. What about mental wellness, right? How do we not just help people who are experiencing depression or anxiety or other experiences like that, but also help people live fulfilling lives, right? How do we create meaning and purpose for people? And it was in that context that I started to read the literature on human connection and how important supportive relationships are for our health. And I was shocked and amazed. I mean, there's the data is really incredible, showing that if you feel supported, if you have those close ties, you have a lower risk of heart disease, of dementia, of depression, of premature mortality at the severe end of things. And I was really interested in, how do we apply those insights in our lives, right? Like, what does that actually mean for you and me as we're going about our days? If this is so important, what are the ways that we can actually make this part of our lives? And so very early on, I created this app that was all about, an app and a campaign all about taking research insights and making them actionable for everyday people to do specific things in their day-to-day, to reach out, to express gratitude, things like that we know in the literature are helpful. Here's how you can do them. And actually, I know you had James Doty on as a guest recently.
Yeah.
So he, at his center at Stanford, the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, I did a summer research fellow with them, and then they actually gave me funding to develop this campaign. And so when I was doing that research, and this was a long time ago now, this was like 11 or 12 years ago, that's when I came across this term social health in the research. And I thought, this makes so much sense. There was this researcher, Russell, in the early 1970s who said, we define health as physical, mental, and social. What is that social piece? Why aren't we defining this? And it made so much sense to me, because it's this natural extension of our language to understand that it's relational as much as it is about our bodies and our minds. But there was almost no information. I mean, at that time, there weren't that many papers on social health. Going into looking at mainstream outlets and sources, this wasn't a mainstream term by any means. And even today, there's no Wikipedia page about social health. Like, it's just not part of our everyday lexicon. And I think that's because the way we understand health and what it means to be healthy and what we need to do to be healthy evolves over time as we have scientific advancements, as we do public advocacy, as we change policies, right? It wasn't that long ago that people didn't know smoking caused lung cancer. And then we had to understand that in the research, spread that knowledge in the public, and implement policies to support that. And I think we're now ready at this time where it took a while for mental health to come into the mainstream. Now that's very much part of the mainstream, right? Gen Z, everyone talks about going to therapy very comfortably. It's just part of what we talk about. I think this next wave that's coming is focused on social health. We're finally catching up to the research and saying, okay, we need to prioritize this. And just last year, we have the U.S. Surgeon General who issued an advisory about isolation and loneliness, kind of on the flip side. We have initiatives like that across the country and around the world, acknowledging that our social lives are about more than just feeling happy. They truly affect our health. And so in the coming years, I think we're going to see social health become very much part of what we all understand to be a healthy life.
Wow. Well, I mean, social health is certainly important. I'm convinced of that. What can you share about, at the population level, social health today? Like, how are people faring?
That's a great question. Yeah. So I mentioned that the U.S. Surgeon General issued that report on isolation and loneliness. And a lot of people, including him, say there's a loneliness epidemic right now, right? And there's certainly data that's very alarming. I mean, Gallup did a global poll that found that 20% of people don't feel like they have anyone they can rely on for support.
20%? Wow.
20% of adults worldwide. They also found that 330 million people worldwide go 2 or more weeks at a time without talking to a single friend or family member.
What?
Yeah.
That sounds crazy to me.
Yeah. And we see this in other ways too. Like, for example, the number of friends that people here in the US have has declined in recent decades. So people have fewer friends. The number of people who say they have no close friends has gone up. And the amount of time that people spend with the friends they do have has also declined. So we're seeing trends like that are very worrisome. We see that around half of people report not feeling a sense of belonging in their local community or in their workplaces. So there's a lot of these different indications that suggest that the social health of people here in the US, but also in countries around the world, is suffering in a lot of different ways. And we really need to address that.
What do we attribute it to? I mean, social media comes to mind, obviously.
Yeah, that's definitely one factor. I think there are a number of different trends going on. Social media and technology, for sure. I did a lot of research into AI and how people are using AI as companionship, like as a substitute for human connection. But even in more subtle ways, the amount of time that we spend on social media rather than connecting face-to-face in person is certainly one factor. But there's also things like more people live alone now, right? And living on your own doesn't mean you're going to feel lonely, but it means that you're spending potentially less time with people. It's more of a risk factor, right? So that's one example. There's a lot more transience. So I myself am guilty of this. I've moved around to different cities and different countries multiple times. That disrupts your social life and the embedded network of friends and family that you grew up with. So we see a lot of different factors like that. I also think work trends, we spend a lot of time working, and that means that perhaps we're spending less time with friends and family, but also it means that how we spend our work hours, if those are alone and isolated versus if we are connecting meaningfully with our coworkers, that's going to have an outsized effect on our social health. So there's a confluence of different factors that are coming together here to contribute to these frankly very worrisome trends for social health.
Yeah, and dating today is harder than it's ever been. I hear that all the time. I've experienced that. I mean, it's like really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think part of, I think one of the fact that people are now more health conscious, I think is likely a reason why they're, at least here in LA, I've heard that the bars and nightclubs are a fraction as populated as they once were because people are more health conscious now. People are drinking less. It's become a lot less. It's become a lot more commonplace to not drink, to be sober. And so I think that's obviously a positive thing, but it's, I think perhaps come at a cost.
Interesting.
You
Yeah. Well, and so it makes me wonder, one of the conditions that we need in our culture and in our society to be socially healthy is gathering spaces where we can go and spend time to each other. So if people aren't going to bars, where are they going, right? Are they going somewhere else instead? Are they going to parks or to restaurants or to each other's houses? Like, where is that interaction happening, or is it not, right? Is it online instead? So I think that's really interesting and makes me think about the importance of making sure that we have places where people can connect in healthy ways, where it's not dependent on drinking.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are more people now flooding gyms and fitness-themed lifestyle places, like workout classes and things like that. But I don't necessarily know if those environments are as conducive to socializing. You know, they tend to be functional in the sense that you get a workout in, but
right. But what if they were?
Yeah.
It feels like an untapped opportunity. Like,
it does.
I've made a friend in a Pilates class because I took the initiative to strike up conversation, and it just happened to work out where we were both receptive to then talking for a bit and exchanging numbers and hanging out. But how do you structure that instead, right? Like, what if there are opportunities in gyms or other places where people are going where you can opt into connecting in a different way, or there are more social opportunities adjacent to the workout class that you're doing. Maybe there's an opportunity for connecting after. Like, I think there's just so much more opportunity there for us to engineer opportunities for meaningful connection. You already know you share something in common, which is you want to work out or you care about your health.
Yeah, and values are an important shared values. That's an important predictor for relational success.
Absolutely.
Long term.
Shared values and consistently seeing each other. So if you're going to the gym every week, that's a great opportunity to develop that friendship. You're going to continually see that person. But it takes that initial kind of opportunity for actually talking rather than working out on separate machines and never interacting.
Yeah, and also one surefire way of opting out of social interaction at the gym is wearing headphones. So if you want to, one way to potentially signal to people that you're open to meeting others is to not wear headphones, I suppose.
Right, yeah.
Simple little hack like that, can make all the difference.
Totally.
Could potentially meet the love of your life.
Yeah.
Or have it be a completely missed connection.
Yep.
All based on your decision to listen to the new T Swift album that day,
Totally. I met my husband in the staircase of our apartment building.
Oh, really?
Because he struck up conversation on the staircase.
Wow.
We were neighbors. We lived in the same building. So yeah, you got to pay attention to the people around you and be open to that interaction because you never know what's going to happen.
So true. You mentioned earlier that you are naturally an introvert. Are introverts more at risk for having poor social health?
That's a great question. Not necessarily. So the way I would describe it is that we each have different needs and preferences around the amount and type of connection that we get, right? In the same way that we have different needs and preferences around exercise habits or sleep habits, or, we need different calorie numbers. And, if you love going to the gym, maybe I love going hiking, and we just have different preferences, right? So that applies to our social lives as well. For an introvert like me, I just need less connection, right? I still need it. We all need to feel like we are cared for, to have that sense of being seen and heard and belonging. Everyone shares that, no matter where you are on the introvert-extrovert spectrum, but it's the amount and types that are different. So for me, I love, meaningful conversations with friends and then having alone time in between to recharge my batteries. For an extrovert, they're just happier with more social interaction, right? They're more comfortable. That's energizing to them in a different way. And so one is not necessarily better than the other. They're just different. And I think, one interesting thing though too is that some of the research shows that when you go a little bit outside of your comfort zone, it actually has benefits. So for example, there was a study where they hooked people up with an audio recorder, and they polled them multiple times throughout the day to ask how you were feeling, who you were talking to. And they followed them for a week, recording their conversations, checking in with them. And they found that the more people interacted, whether or not they were introverts or extroverts, the happier they felt, which is surprising because that means that introverts do enjoy more interaction, but they might not think they do. And they also looked at the depth of conversation, and they found that extroverts also liked deep conversations, but introverts benefited from them a little bit more. So again, it's how do we lean into what feels right for us and take care of the needs that we have, right? I need alone time to recharge, but also how do we push a little bit outside of our comfort zones because the benefits might surprise us.
It's interesting. It makes me think it makes me wonder whether or not there's like a tendency for a delta between, people who self-report as introverts and whether or not they actually are introverts. Like what if being an introvert is like just this narrative that they've told themselves and they've lived with,
That's interesting.
for years and years because they maybe didn't have the social skills, like socializing, being competent in social situations requires a certain skill set.
It requires practice too.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I also more anecdotally hear that a lot of extroverts coming out of the pandemic have found that they like some alone time more than they used to. So their habits have changed as well, which I think is interesting. Perhaps there's more fluidity to these identities than we realize.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm an introvert. There are times when I can be more introverted. Mm-hmm. And then there are times when I really thrive on, interacting with others.
Yeah.
It just depends.
You do it for a living.
Yeah, I do it. I do it for a living, But yeah, but there are definitely moments where I feel like I need my alone time,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's super valuable for me. Like self-care. I like working out alone. Mm-hmm. I'm not like a class guy. Mm-hmm. I don't even like working out with friends, to be honest. Mm-hmm. I like working out by myself. But yeah, then I do thrive, I think, in social situations.
Yeah. And I think really, I invite everyone to just reflect on their own situation, right? Because I think we all can benefit from paying more attention to that and reflecting on what interactions do leave me feeling energized versus drained. What is the right amount of interaction for me? And again, being more intentional about making sure that connection is a part of our day-to-day, that it's something we prioritize alongside our physical and mental health. That's really what I'm advocating for everyone to do. It's to prioritize connection like we prioritize other health behaviors in a way that feels nourishing for you.
And one of the things that's so cool about your book is that you offer a method. So what are some practical steps then that you can offer our listeners, our viewers, to help them improve their social health?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are 4 strategies that I talk about in the book. And again, these are based on sort of the quality and quantity of interaction that you feel like you're needing. And so I walk through an exercise of how to kind of assess your social health, but it really comes down to 4 main approaches. And the analogy I draw is when we think about, strengthening our physical muscles, we can stretch our physical muscles, and in that same way, we can stretch our social muscles. So to stretch your social muscles, that means making new friends, joining new communities, seeking to broaden the number of potential people and groups who are part of your life. We can also rest our physical muscles, right? It's really important to take breaks in between reps or in between workouts so that your body can recover. In that same way, we can rest our social muscles. So perhaps you have enough friends and family and connections and you feel like maybe even it's too much. You're already not on top of the relationships in the way that you want to be. So in that case, your strategy is to rest, right? To double down on the connections that matter to you and not seek out more necessarily. The third strategy is around toning. So just like we tone our physical muscles to get stronger, we can tone our social muscles to deepen the relationships that we already have, right? To take them to that deeper level, and really become closer with the people who matter to us most. And then the last strategy is to flex our social muscles. So just like you show off your physical muscles, you can flex your social muscles, which means sustaining them in the long term, right? Making sure that you're continually investing in those relationships and making that part of your life in the long term.
Wow. So cool. So you offer a plan in the book, essentially.
There's a plan, yes. Yeah. There's lots of tips. And it's really about, thinking of our social muscles in the same way that we do physical muscles, because they are muscles that we can strengthen and that we need to pay attention to, right? We need to exercise our bodies to be healthy. We need to exercise our social skills in order to be healthy as well.
Wow. Is there a morning routine that can help to optimize our social health?
I love that. I like the idea of the morning routine. So one of the tips that I recommend for people is to write a to-love list. So if you think about starting your day with a to-do list, right, of all the things you want to accomplish that day, instead, or in addition, write a to-love list. So who are the people who matter most to you, who you want to make sure that you're giving your love and attention. And you could write that list for the day. Like today, I'm going to reach out to this friend or give a call to that family member. Or you could do it more kind of longer term thinking. So have a sticky note of the top, say, 5 to 10 people who you really want to make sure that you're nourishing constantly, and put that next to on your computer screen or next to your coffee machine or next to your toothbrush, so that you're looking at that each morning and thinking and being intentional, reminding yourself that it's important to connect with those people and reflecting on whether you're nourishing those relationships in the way that you want to.
Is there any data on texting versus having a, like a voice conversation with somebody? Because like most of my interactions these days are via text.
Yeah, totally. And for most people, that's true too. I'm not sure about directly comparing them. What I will say is that in-person human connection really is ideal. And as much as we can, aim for that in an amount that feels right and feasible to us, that's great. But there's also data showing that just a simple text to someone saying, I'm thinking of you, helps you feel closer. The other person, we underestimate how much people appreciate hearing from us. Again, as simple as a text message saying, I'm thinking of you. And there's also interesting studies, like there was one that invited people to send an email to someone they knew was going through a tough time, to say, hey, I know you're going through a tough time, thinking about you, express just that they care. And they found that the people sending those significantly underestimated how much the other person would appreciate it. They overestimated how awkward the other person would find it. And they underestimated how warm and helpful their email would come across. So there's this sort of limiting belief we have where we might not reach out in ways that can actually benefit our relationships and mean a lot to the other person because we don't actually think they matter, when in fact they really do.
So don't hesitate, send that text.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I love that. I'm in a bunch of different group texts. I text with my family all the time. We're super close. I've got group threads on Instagram. We're always sharing memes back and forth, which I think is, a fun artifact of modern society. Cool way to connect. Shared humor. That seems like a value that would be predictive in terms of, long-term relationship success as well. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love chats like that too. I mean, I have a family chat that we message photos and little things going on every single day. Sometimes it's too much, but it means that we're staying connected. My family all lives in Canada, and so I don't get to see them as often. So it's this we feel like we're constantly in communication and in sync on each other's lives when we can't do that in person. And so I think those kinds of touch points can be really valuable. They do help you feel like you're staying connected to people.
100%. Does the relationship that we have with our pets have any bearing on our social health?
This is a great question. So I focus a lot of my work on human connection, but there's absolutely benefits to connection with non-human sources as well, whether that's pets. They can be such a valuable source of companionship, of company, of joy, of like just getting you out of the house if you're walking your dog, or just feeling like you're getting attention and getting love. I have 2 little bunnies.
Bunnies?
Yeah.
Wow.
They're a lot like cats. They're litter trained. They hop around, and they live in my office. It's super cute.
They live in your office?
They live in my office.
Wow, they just hop around.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they're litter trained just like cats. So
wow.
And I love them. They totally keep me company, right? Like when I was writing this book, it was my bunnies and me in my office.
Are they affectionate?
Yeah, super affectionate. So cute.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know what I've been hearing? I've been hearing that like rats make amazing pets.
Interesting.
Yeah, that they're incredibly smart, incredibly affectionate.
Interesting.
The problem though is that they only live like 2 years long.
Yeah.
So you create this bond with them that's just as strong as it would be for any other pet.
Yeah.
And they're gone in 2 years, and it's just incredibly heartbreaking.
Are they affectionate?
I've heard they're, yeah.
Really?
Well,
They're not that cute though.
I'm now apparently on like rat Instagram, pet rat Instagram, because I see it because I look, maybe I look for it. I don't know. It definitely catches my eye. I see it on my feed or on my Explore page. There are a lot of people that have like pet rats, and they're incredibly affectionate.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got bunnies, so I can't judge.
Yeah.
It's unusual too. But I think your broader point about, can we get our connection needs met by other sources? And I think it's such an interesting and important one. I mentioned before AI, and there's a lot of people now who use AI chatbots as companions.
Wow.
Hundreds of millions of users around the world who are using chatbots as friends, as therapists, and even in extreme cases as lovers, as partners. And they have what feels to them like very real, meaningful relationships. And so I think we increasingly need to think about what is the value of non-human sources of connection. I think another example is feeling connected to someone who's passed away. Right? You can still a relationship can continue being very meaningful and a source of comfort and love even after that person has passed away. Another example is God. I mean, for people who are religious and have a very close sense of relationship with God, that confers its own benefits. And so I focus a lot on human connection, but it's interesting to think about all the ways in which we feel connected, or through nature, right? Feeling connected to all things, to animals and to nature. I mean, that's another example. So there are certainly other ways that we can feel connected, but there's something about human connection that is really healing and essential.
Well, we're social animals. I mean, the human animal, we're born essentially half-baked. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that we are meant to complete our development in the presence of others, unlike, some of our primate ancestors or relatives, or like, you take a horse, like days after it's born, it's trotting around and it's like, all cats too, so, I mean, the vast majority of animals, they're born, with a full set of instincts and behaviors already integrated. But for humans, I think, it's the fourth trimester. Like we complete our gestation essentially in the presence of others. And it's that social capacity, that uniquely human social capacity, which is what has led to language and art and everything that it is we've been able to achieve as a species.
Yeah. Everything that makes life worth living.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea of we complete our gestation period with other people. You're absolutely right. And it kind of never ends, right? It's this throughout our life, we are connecting with different people and learning along the way in our relationships and through our relationships about who we are, about the purpose of being here. Beyond just the health benefits, our social lives are what create joy and meaning and purpose. And they need to be the center of our lives much more than they are today.
Do you have a protocol for using social media in a healthy way? Because, I mean, I'm assuming that social media is like a double-edged sword, just like everything else is today. But do you think it's helping or hurting?
Yeah, it's both. It's doing both. I think I actually came out of researching for the book much more pessimistic about social media than I was going into it, to my surprise, because I think the harm is more than I really appreciated before. But it really comes down to how we're using it, right? And how it's designed for us to use, right? So there are the habits that we maintain that we can control to some extent, right? How much time are we spending online? But also, what are the ways we're using it? Is it that we're using social media to passively scroll and just mindlessly looking at content and taking in information? Or are we using it to proactively reach out to people, to stay, keep tabs on the people we care about most? And there are good examples of this, right? Like, for example, there's a wonderful platform called Caring Bridge, where if someone has a health diagnosis, their loved ones can come to this one central place to give them their love, give them their support, help out with things, get updates on how things are going, right? That's technology in its best possible form, where it's enabling someone to get the support they need at a time when they really need it, in an easy way. But, if we're over-relying on it and using it as a substitute for human connection, in person, real, authentic, meaningful human connection, that's a problem. And that's where we see people start to feel lonely, start to feel isolated, start to feel anxious. But also, right, these tools need to be designed in ways that are socially healthy. And I think they need to be much more so, right? Designing, optimizing for meaningful connection rather than just attention constantly.
Do you think curfews are helpful with regard to social media use?
Like on the apps?
Yeah. Like I know some people that, every weekend they take a technology Sabbath.
A Sabbath, yeah.
Yeah, they put their phones away.
Yeah, I think that's great. A curfew, if you mean like where it logs you off after a certain amount of minutes, you can just bypass those really easily.
Which I do every single time.
No one actually, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, because
it's funny because I have it activated. Like I don't actually, I won't go so far as to turn it off. I just ignore it every single time. Yeah. And I get annoyed by it when it pops up.
And it actually just means you're spending more time on your phone because you're like constantly having to dismiss it. Yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah, I don't think those really work. But I love the idea of tech Sabbaths where you're prioritizing in-person connection instead.
How else can we leverage technology to improve our social health?
Yeah. So another way is that we can... I have a few like specific techniques. So I talk about in the book examples of how to stretch, rest, tone, and flex your social muscles.
Yes.
In technology. Do you want to get into some of those?
Yeah, please, because this is one of the most important questions of our time.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's like the new nicotine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like technology, our devices.
Yeah, I know. So we talked about stretching your social muscles. This is about making new friends, joining new communities, right? So how do we use that in a digital context? So I call this the digital stretch. So how do you meet new people online? This could be, for example, using platforms like Meetup or Eventbrite or places where you can find new people who share your hobbies or your interests, and then ideally take those connections offline and meet up in person. So then there's the tech rest, right? You talked about doing a Sabbath on a Saturday where you unplug, rest your digital social muscles, right? Take a break, unplug so that you're connecting in person. Another is the cyber tone. So I talked about toning your muscles, so deepening your connections. And that's, I talked about that example of Caring Bridge where people are able to support someone going through a health diagnosis. That's an example of where they're able to deepen that connection. They're supporting each other and caring for one another at a time of vital need. And I love that because that is toning your social muscles and using technology to do it.
Very positive use.
A very positive use case, yeah. And another example is like, so with stretching your social muscles online is a lot of people who are diagnosed with a rare disease, for example, but who find a supportive network of other patients online and never meet in person, but are able to exchange information. Or things like mom groups or dad groups where you're sharing information about parenting and getting support in those kinds of ways. That's a great example too. And then the last tip is around the virtual flex. So again, like staying in touch online. So during COVID, my family was all in Canada. I was stuck down here. The border was closed. I didn't see my family for 2 years. So technology was an absolutely vital tool during that time where if I wasn't able to FaceTime all the time and celebrate birthdays over Zoom and celebrate holidays over Zoom, I would have felt completely disconnected. But as it was, when I went and finally was able to see my family again, we picked up right where we left off because we'd been able to stay in touch. So it's really just about being mindful of how we're using technology and how much we're using it.
Are any of the social networks more pro-social as compared to anti-social? Like, are would you say that like, any of the existing social networks are more, provide ground that's more fertile for encouraging social health? Because I kind of think of like TikTok and how it's like people describe it. I don't spend that much time on TikTok, but it's like often described as the most addictive social platform, and the content can be incredibly vapid.
Yeah.
And then there's like X, which I enjoy X, but it can be really political and clickbaity. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is there's been a huge flux of new apps that are outside of the big ones we all think of, like Instagram and Twitter and so on, that are designed specifically around social health. Like there are apps, and I actually, in 2020, it's a bit outdated now, but back then I came up with a list, like this resource of, there were almost 200 startups and apps that I identified that were specifically trying to help people develop meaningful connection.
Interesting.
Stay in touch in more connective ways, meet new people in more meaningful ways as a substitute or as instead of the traditional platforms. So we're seeing this huge rise of innovation where more and more technology founders and startups are saying, how do we design technology in ways that are actually socially healthy? And none of them have kind of risen to the heights of a Twitter or a Facebook. But I hope that we will see at least one of them in the years to come. There's so many of these startups. I get a message every week on LinkedIn from a founder who's working in this space and trying to design technology for social health. And that's great. Like, that's a really wonderful sign of what's to come. I love that there are VC firms investing in these kinds of innovations because that's what we need, right? If technology is going to be embedded in the fabric of our lives forever, we need to be really thoughtful about how and what we're designing for us to be socially healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your long-term vision for a socially healthy society?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I come from a public health background, which means that I think about people's health in the context in which they live. So your health is influenced by the actions that you take, the foods you eat, the habits, your lifestyle, but it's also influenced by the people in your community, right? The people you met through work or through school, the network around you here in Los Angeles, right? What is the community that you're part of? The built environment around you. So where are the opportunities in the city and the design of our neighborhoods to connect? In the policies, right, here in the US, the legislation that's in place and the downstream effects that has. Like one example would be parental leave, right? If you're able to spend more time with your child in those first few months or years, that's going to affect physical, mental, social health of the parents and the baby, right? So we can think about it from all these different lenses. And my hope is that increasingly social health will be considered a priority across those lenses in our healthcare. We now have doctors who are prescribing connection and other forms of non-traditional medicine. We see that a lot in the UK, increasingly here in the US, in our technology and the ways that we design technology, in our policies. The UK and Japan have ministers for loneliness who are addressing it in that context. So elevating social health as a priority, just like we prioritize physical and mental health, and more so, into the fabric of our lives across the board. And in my work, in my nonprofit work, in the advising and consulting I do, I get to meet a lot of incredible people who are doing this on the ground, like people in their neighborhoods who are throwing block parties and organizing activities at local parks and doing things to bridge divides, facilitate conversations across people who aren't getting along. There's such an incredible groundswell everywhere I look of people who are taking it upon themselves to build community where they live, where they work, where they play. And it's going to take that groundswell of each of us saying, this is a priority to me, where I live, in the interactions that I have every single day. And it's going to take this broader systemic change of integrating social health into everything we do.
Yeah, whether it's like more parks, dog parks, coffee shops, there are a lot of infrastructural aspects to a city or neighborhood that can be really useful in terms of facilitating health.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it's as easy as just creating places for people to come together.
Yeah. During my master's, I spent a lot of time researching what are the specific design features in our neighborhoods that contribute to social health. One of them is walkability. Are you able to walk to a coffee shop? Do you feel safe in your neighborhood? Is there transportation so that you can get to the places you want to go to connect people? Things like green space, right? If a place has plants and trees and flowers, it's more inviting. It's more likely that people are going to linger and interact. So there's all these ways in which we can also design our spaces, our buildings, our classrooms, our offices to facilitate more meaningful connection.
You shared something really interesting before we got rolling, where if when you're drinking something warm, it makes you have warmer feelings towards the person that you're talking to or that you're sitting across from.
Yeah. So it's this idea of embodied cognition. And I learned about this when I was an undergraduate student studying psychology. So this is going far back in my mind. But as I remember it, the idea is that so for example, this mug is really cold. If it was warm, I would probably like you more.
Interesting.
No offense. But that's what the data shows. Like there's something about that embodied cognition. So if it's warm, if my chair is comfortable, I'm more likely to like the other person. And so there in and of itself, you can think about how do you design this studio in a way that we're going to connect better. And maybe it's super subtle, but our bodies and our minds are taking in these kinds of data points from the environment around us, and they're influencing our perception of each other.
Well, it's like an Inception, like that movie, where like I could give you warm water to evoke feelings in you of coziness, of warmth, of comfort.
And I project that onto you.
And that's going to be projected back onto me.
Yeah. So another interesting example. Yeah, absolutely. Hot tip. Give people you want to like you warm water.
Yeah. Wow.
But also another example is, so these researchers did this study where they gave people mild electric shocks. I don't know who consents to participate in these things, but anyway, a group of people got mild electric shocks, and they were either looking at a photo of their romantic partner or they were looking at a photo of a complete stranger. If they were looking at a photo of their romantic partner, they reported feeling less fear, and the brain regions in their brain associated with pain were less activated than if they were looking at the photo of the stranger. So here again, you can see how even just looking at a photo of someone you care about is going to change your experience of fear and pain to an outside stimuli.
Wow.
That's astonishing.
It is. So this field is called embodied cognition?
That study I just said is a little different, but the idea of like the holding a warm mug of water or sitting on a comfortable chair, that's called embodied cognition. And I'm not an expert in that, but that's what I remember from psychology.
There was a study that I read a couple years ago that I thought was really interesting, and I remember it to this day. I actually wrote about it, I think, in my second book, where they gave it was like one of these like really interesting psychology studies where they sat people down at tables, and one group, the table that one group was sitting at individually was wobbly. It's like a wobbly, unstable, furniture.
Yeah.
And the chair as well. And they gave them pictures of, they made them look at pictures of celebrity couples and predict like how long they thought that relationship was going to last. And then they did the same thing to people sitting at furniture that was stable, like a stable table and chair. And the group that was sitting at the wobbly furniture, they had a more pessimistic outlook on the celebrity couples.
That is so interesting.
Yeah, so they were projecting emotional instability onto these celebrity couples based on their physical instability, the physical instability of their immediate environment.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, it was
that's incredible.
Right?
But it makes you think about, coming back to social health, like all of these things in our environments are influencing our interactions and influencing how connected or not we feel and influencing our health, right? So if you have a stressor, something that you're going through that's really difficult, relationships are going to buffer that stress. They're going to reduce the amount of cortisol and inflammation in your body, which would otherwise make you susceptible to disease and illness, right? Having those relationships in place strengthens your immune system. There's really interesting studies looking at, for example, the more people are hugged and the more supported they feel over a couple-week period, the fewer cold symptoms they have when they're subjected to a cold virus, So it's literally changing the experience of our bodies and our health in the long term.
So crucially important. And you could engineer your environment too to facilitate, as you've described, better social health, but just better creative insight, healthier
Creativity.
mood, all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Shall we overhaul your studio?
Yeah. It's funny. I am definitely interested in revamping this baby at some point, because as much as I love this format, sitting across from one another, I do think something like a more informal setup, like a couch kind of vibe, could be really cool. I don't know.
Hanging out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Give your guests some warm water.
Yeah. Tea for everybody. We get like a tea sponsor. So what's next for you? So you're putting out this incredible book.
Thank you. Yes.
You're obviously doing the rounds on podcasts, talking about it. Is this primarily what you study, like full time?
Social health is my true passion for sure. I do a lot of work advising companies across sectors on how to build socially healthy products, workplaces, communities. I also have a nonprofit called Social Health Labs, where we fund and catalyze social health at the neighborhood level, but all the way up to the strategic level for countries and cities and things like that. So yeah, I'm very passionate about translating the research, right? Helping people understand, what does this mean for your life? I wrote this book to be a practical toolkit. Like, how can you be more socially healthy? And how can all of us work toward a more connected culture? And I love sharing that information, but also putting it into practice, right? Working with community builders and leaders across different sectors to think about the ways that we can weave that into everything we do in every facet of our lives.
Does such a thing exist as a check engine light for one's social health? I mean, we have biomarkers associated with chronic disease. You get your lipids tested, triglycerides, blood sugar, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Body fat, waist circumference. But how would you measure somebody's social health?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing about social health is it's subjective, right? So there are validated surveys that assess how lonely you are or how connected you feel, and those are important indications. But ultimately, they're self-report, because it's only you can know how meaningfully connected you feel, right? I can't run a blood test to see if you feel lonely. I can't, do a urine sample to understand or a brain scan to understand if someone feels like they have friends and family who are loving, if they feel heard and supported in that meaningful way. You have to tell me that in order for me to know that. And I can't tell from outside appearances, right? Someone could have be very social, an active butterfly who's going to parties all the time and has people over at the house all the time, and still feel really lonely. And in the same vein, someone can not interact that often and actually spend a lot of time alone and yet feel really fully connected, because they have those relationships that they know they can rely on. So we can't tell from outward appearances either. So I think, in the book, I have kind of a 3-step process for helping people assess their social health. But I don't really believe in assigning a score to it, because it's not about a number, it's about the quality of your relationships. And that's something that's much harder to quantify, and something that really comes down to, do you feel like you've got the connection that you need in your life or not?
Yeah. I would propose using one of those visual analog scales that they use in the emergency room. Like, what degree of pain are you in? It's 10 faces.
Yeah. Shall we develop one?
Let's develop one. Yeah. I don't know what that's called, but is it just a visual analog or something like that. It's like rating your the degree of social pain that you're experiencing on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are definitely surveys that can give you different numbers. But the key point is that it's subjective, right? And it changes over time too, right? When we have a life transition, if you move to a new city or you start a new job or you become a parent or you retire, those are examples of where your social health is going to ebb and flow. Or maybe you outgrow certain friendships and find yourself wanting more. We all go through these cycles in our relational lives, and that's okay. That's healthy. Just like we do with our physical and mental health, right? Sometimes you're physically stronger. Sometimes you're going through something that's causing a lot of anxiety. Sometimes you're feeling on top of the world. It's natural for that to ebb and flow over time.
Is there anything that stands out as being particularly surprising to you when you learned it? Maybe it was over the course of writing the book. Maybe it's over the course of your research career.
Yeah, I mean, so many things. I think more recently what's been really surprising to me is the number of people who, and I mentioned this, but the number of people who are relying on artificial companions as their main source of human connection. And it's non-human connection, but it's their main source of connection, period.
That's wild.
It's pretty wild.
What's the AI? Is it like literally Chat GPT that people are using?
No, there are specific companies that have AI products that are companions.
Wow.
And you can choose if it's platonic or romantic. You can choose what they look like, different things like that. You can customize them. And so I tried one as part of researching, and it wasn't for me, but it is for a lot of people. And I think, part of being socially healthy means having diverse people who you can rely on for the different parts of your needs, right? We need friends, we need romantic partners, we need family, we need clubs that we belong to or groups, we need interactions with coworkers. It's really about having a diverse social landscape. That's important. And I think if AI is one source of that, perhaps that can have interesting benefits. What worries me is that a lot of people that I came across in my research are relying on it as their sole source of social health.
Yeah.
It's a supplement, it's not a complement. And it concerns me that people feel like they need to turn to AI out of desperation. If you're choosing it as an interesting source of conversation and support when your friends are all asleep or something like that, that's one thing. But I hope that we will be more intentional about creating a world where people feel empowered to go out and weather the highs and lows of in-person relationships, right? It's hard. We all encounter conflict. We all encounter difficulties. Even in the best, healthiest relationships, you're not going to get along at all times. And so I think we need to be teaching these skills from a young age in our schools. We need to be really prioritizing social health in our society so much more so that people don't have to turn to AI companions out of need, out of feeling like they can't get that connection anywhere else, so that it's an option rather than a dependency.
Yeah, it's totally analogous to me to the Ozempic craze. How people are leaning on it as a first line defense against becoming overweight, and they're using it as a supplement, not a complement to healthy, integrating and instituting healthy habits and dietary change. They're just taking the shot. They're now starting, pushing it on children. But at the end of the day, I'm super glad that we have this drug. For people who are at risk, it's going to reduce risk for cardiovascular disease. They're now studying it in the setting of dementia. And for people who, really need it as a last ditch effort, I think it's amazing. It's revolutionary, in fact. But the fact that so many people are now, they're reaching for it as a first line before exhausting all other options, I think that's problematic and sad, really.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of compassion. Like, a lot of people feel really isolated and lonely and feel like they're failing in their human relationships, and that's something that I hope that we can address in other ways, and it's just fascinating. It's going to be a question going forward for our times of, what do we want the role of technology to be in our social lives? Do we want AI friends and wives and husbands, or what is our relationship to that? How do we create that future? Because it's certainly it's here.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I go to AI. I use AI all the time, but not to replace my relationships. No way. Well, thanks so much for coming in. Yeah, this was super cool, super interesting.
Thank you.
Where can people pick up your book, and where can they connect with you on the socials?
Yeah, so the book is available anywhere books are sold. It's called The Art and Science of Connection, Why Social Health is the Missing Key to Living Longer, Healthier, and Happier. You can connect with me at kasleykillam.com. I have a Substack newsletter if you're interested in staying on top of all the new insights that are coming out in the space. And I'm also at Kasley Killam on Instagram and LinkedIn.
Love it. What does living a genius life mean to you? It's the last question that everybody gets asked on the show. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I should have thought about this one. Living a genius life. Well, I'd be remiss to not say it means living a connected life, but I would also say it means living a centered life, a present life, whether it's present with the people around you, whether it's present with yourself and with nature and animals like we talked about. I think, being centered and connected, that's being a genius.
Love it. Well, thanks again for coming in.
Thank you.
Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.